Okay, I'm here.
Welcome, Venerable.
Thank you, darling. Thank you, Tara. Thank you, everybody. My picture in real time now. There's my Buddha. It's not quite bright enough. There's Buddha.
Welcome back home, at least.
Yeah. Hello there, Lars.
Hello.
You got two circles extra. I've got two extra eyes, white eyes here on my glasses. I can't help it. It's my light shining on me. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, let's go. What are we going to do first, Lars?
We'll be doing our mandala. Here we go.
Good. Okay. All right. Always remembering what we're doing. Don't just do it as a ritual. It's a prayer and it's sung, but it's words. And so we here it's like this ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru. Okay, we've never heard of Mount Meru. We know about the sun and the moon. We don't know about the 4 continents. So this is according to Buddhist cosmology. So if we don't know that, then we just visualize all the marvelous things of this world, which is the point, all the things in this world that make people happy. You're simply thinking of piling them all up. Use your creative imagination and sending to the Buddha, offering to the Buddha as a request for the teachings. That's the thing. It's like paying for your ticket, you know, offering as much as you can, offering as a request for the teachings. That's it.
Sashi Purki Yukting Meto Samri Rabiji Nihidegyan Padi Sangye Shindu Nekche Uwagi Roku Nanda Shila Chepaksho Jetsun Lama Dampakina Kicha Kikala Kense Churchinchi Jita Shampe Duje Simada Sabge Churki Chapa Vatu So Idam Guru Ratna Mandala Kamya Chayami.
Okay. So we remind ourselves of our reliance on the Buddha and his teachings, and we state our purpose for being here together, to listen to these teachings, to develop our own potential so we can to become a Buddha, to be of benefit to transmigratory beings. That's the point. So I'll say it one time in English with a few extra words. So we're saying, until we're enlightened, we're going to rely upon the Buddha, his teachings, and the Supreme Sangha, the assembly, a spiritual community. And by the virtuous karma I create by listening to these teachings, may we become a Buddha. So we can be of benefit to every single sentient being. We'll be fully qualified then. That's our long-term goal. That's our purpose. That's the end result of this journey we're making. Sangye Cherdang Soke Chognam La Jancho Baru Dagni Kyabsuchi Dagi Chernyen Gi Personam Ki Dola Penche Sangye Drubha Shog Sangye Cherdang Soke Chognam La Jancho Baru Dagni Kyabsuchi Dagi Chernyen Gi Personam Ki Dola Penche Sangye Drubha Shog. That's it. Thank you very much, Lars. All right, let's review what we've discussed so far in this module. But just again, to give us the overview, the more we understand that we're all the bits fit, the more everything makes sense. If we don't get a feeling of the big picture, then you're completely lost. You know, it's just a series of random pop-up teachings. If you can't see where they all fit with each other, then it's really difficult, isn't it? Think of it again. Always use the same type of analogies. You're studying math. At any given point, you read your math book. You just pick up a page, just randomly turn to a page in your big math book. You will know where it fits in relation to the rest of the information. And if it doesn't fit, then it's just weird. And if you don't know, then you're confused. But it's so curious for us, we don't think of spiritual teachings like that, you know. But it's exactly the same. So here we're discussing the teachings and practices suitable to the disciple of the middle capability, or putting it another way, we're discussing the teachings and practices shared by the disciples with middle capability. So what that means is, okay, so then the wisdom wing, and I use the wisdom wing and compassion wing analogy all the time, which is so helpful. This is the second part of the wisdom wing. So, and again, like I use analogy, junior school and high school. This is high school. This is the middle scope, as they call it. This is the second part of the wisdom wing. And the first part was in discussing about karma, mostly about karma, refuge, getting all the ground sorted out, understanding, and then this next level, the first level, first scope, the teachings and practices shared by the person of the least capability is, that the essence of all that path, the essence of that section of the teachings and practices is abiding by the laws of karma. That's the essence of it. The essence of it is the essence of it. That's the actual practice. So the result of that practice, the function of that level of practice is to stop the first kind of suffering, which is the suffering of suffering, which means, first of all, awful rebirths, and even in a good rebirth, such as a human, awful experiences. That's called the suffering of suffering. And we think of the Four Noble Truths. There's 3 levels of suffering. So to stop the first kind of suffering, you practice junior school. And they're the practices and teachings suitable or shared by the person who is, of the least capability. It's not trying to insult anybody. That's the practice of ethics, basically. And that is to stop your future suffering, to stop your future suffering, to stop your future suffering. It's the method you'd use to stop your future suffering. So we know we don't want suffering. So if you can try and consider rebirths, think about the suffering mind of an animal. We don't think like that, but if you try and think about it, the suffering is stupendously unbelievable. I mean, Lama Zopa said one time, like a friend quoted, and I'm sure he said it 1,000 times in different ways, but this one particular friend, she remembers back in the 70s. And this is shocking to our ears, He said, if we could, just for a moment, have a direct experience of the mind of our little doggy woggy, he didn't say doggy woggy, our little pussy wussy, and I'm adding the word mental, the mental suffering would be so unbearable for just a millisecond that you would never want to waste another precious second of this precious human life. That is not how we think, is it? But this is the Buddhist perspective, Because you see, Buddhist psychology refers to all living beings. So when he talks about delusions, which is our job in this module, although we've had a module already called the mind, and we learned all about that in the very first module. And so, when we understand the mind, we understand the delusions and the virtues. Well, one of the sufferings of animals, that's just the animals, not to mention the spirits and the hell beings. They mainly only have delusion. They can only access the delusion. So the ignorance, ego grasping, which is rooted in fear. Look how humans live their lives. Look at the fear and panic we live in. And we have access to virtues. Look at the mental torment, the depression, the anxiety, the fears, the dramas that drive humans. Well, animals are 1 trillion times more powerful than that, if you can imagine that. The mental, forget the physical. I mean, forget the suffering of being abused, misused. I mean, even just the animals that are used and misused by humans. Beyond just the suffering is beyond bearing. And look at the suffering of animals with each other. We tend to romanticize the wild. Of course, buffaloes eat lions for breakfast. Isn't this delicious? And you bring your children in to watch the videos. But can you imagine being eaten if you had to walk outside the door one day and you're going to be eaten alive anytime? Can you imagine this? The nightmare of that. So animals have a stupendous suffering, 1 billion times more powerful than ours. We're not even discussing the physical, we're discussing the mental. So who wants that? Very simple. If you can imagine rebirth, thank you very much, but no thank you. Thank you very much, but no thank you. The kind of karma called experiences similar to the cause, which is how you're seen and treated by others. Think of a rat, okay? A rat. In English, that word is horrible, because we can't stand rats. Just think of being a person who, when you walk out your front door, whoever sees you screams in fear and horror and wants to annihilate you immediately. Can you imagine having that level of suffering, that level of karma, that you're so repulsive to other beings, they're horrified by you and they want to kill you immediately, or like a spider? That's the karma of those sentient beings. That's the karma they created, to be born as such a creature that people are horrified by you, loathe you, are disgusted by you, want to murder you immediately. Can you imagine that one? Well, you think, do I want that? No, thank you. Do you want to be sick? No, thank you. Do you want to be killed? No, thank you. Lied to, stolen from? No, thank you. Poor? No, thank you. It's pretty clear. You don't want that. Well, Buddha says, hey, guys, here's a method. Stop creating it. And how do you create that? By doing those very actions yourself. So that's the first level of practice. Quit harming others, baby. That's it. So you can guarantee when you die, you get a lovely human body with a lovely family, money in the bank, good food, good health. No one will harm you. No one will lie to you. People will love you. Can you imagine? Even just another decent human body with nice conditions. Who doesn't want that? That's the first scope. That's the first level of practice. The first level of the wisdom wing. Now, we're on the next one now. This is more subtle, more sophisticated. We're now getting to the root of the problem, which is the mind. So do we want the subtle level of suffering, which is much harder to identify? We've been talking about it, which is the suffering of change, which is caused by attachment. So the combination of these two, the result is what they call renunciation. You give up suffering and its causes. Now, if you are going to complete the wisdom wing, if you're going to complete the path here, if you were in Burma or Thailand, this is where you would complete the path. It's the teachings known as the Theravadan teachings around the world, or Hinayana. Hinayana is a broad level term referred to this level of practice, and Theravadan is one of the remaining 18 sub-schools of thought that you learn all about when you study Buddha's tenets. That's the teachings of Buddha that you learn in Burma, Thailand, and so on. So the end result here, the wisdom wing, you would graduate at the wisdom wing, you'd graduate at high school, you'd control your body, speech, and mind, abide by the laws of karma. Junior school, you go to high school, you start to get unpack and unravel the mind, you'd see the mind, you'd be sick of the subtle level of suffering, you give up attachment, you get shamatha, you'd realize emptiness, and eventually in one life or other, you'll perfect your realization of emptiness, you'll achieve your nirvana, and when you die, honey child, you are out of here. You will not come back. So we are discussing those teachings, those shared by the practitioners of the middle capability, which is the Theravadan teachings. They're all the same, all Buddha's teachings. So of course, we're not aiming to get shamatha here and get realized emptiness. That comes later for us. The main cause here, the main thing here is to get renunciation of suffering and its causes, all kinds of suffering and its causes, and be energized to want to give it up, you know. So the main thing is, as Lama Zopa says, you've got renunciation when just the thought of another moment of attachment is so disgusting. It's like being in a septic tank. Another time he said it's like using used toilet paper. A graphic little example. So think of someone else's toilet paper with shit on it and you wipe your little bottom with that. That's pretty disgusting, we would think. He uses these very clear little illustrations. Like being in a septic tank. Even just the smell of your own caca in the toilet is pretty disgusting. Somebody else's smell is 1 billion times more disgusting. But imagine drowning in it, swimming in it. I'm just sorry, but you know, propulsive. Well, this shows how far we have to go, that just the thought of another moment of attachment is as disgusting as that. So be humble, people. Way to go. So we're discussing this second scope of teachings, you know. So as we discussed last week, the week before, I think we just looked a little bit, tried to look into detail about attachment and the way it's different from pleasure, how it's different from love. We look into all the details, you know. Later on in Venerable Fedor's teachings, we look into the mind in more detail. Maybe today we'll look into what he says in his course notes. But last week we looked a little bit at the different ways they present the different kinds of suffering. I usually just talk about the 3 kinds of suffering. But he talked about all these other kinds of levels of suffering, you know, which one needs to look into, which of course we find totally depressing because we think, why am I thinking about suffering? Well, if you can't know the suffering of a certain disease, if you can't look at all the disadvantages of having cancer, you know, if you want to give up cigarettes, I think the best method is to go watch videos of all the cancerous lungs, look at all the suffering, go to the hospitals where people have cancer, look at the terrible suffering of just the physical sickness of it. If that's not a way to give you the horror to want to give up the cause of it, then what else would be? I mean, we can sit here very comfortably and think, oh, how terrible cancer would be, but you won't be really touched by it until you see it. It's the same here. So we need to think about it. think about the different kinds of suffering. You know, he's talked about the 6 suffering, the 3 sufferings, the 18, whatever they were, all the lists we did last week. That's what we went through last week. The purpose of this is to want to give it up. To give it up. To not want the results. To not want that suffering. So the whole thing here, I think I always say this, we in our culture, we really miss the real point of Buddha's teachings on what suffering is, because we just feel it's depressing talking about suffering all the time. I don't want to talk about that. Why don't always talk about suffering? You know, it sounds depressing to us. And then when we do hear about it, and we hear about karma and all this in the lower realms, all that stuff, we maybe just get guilty. Well, I'm a bad person, you know, we get all neurotic. But the thing that the Buddha's approach here is he's trying to energize us to see how appalling suffering is. And the level here in particular, you know, is also the subtler level of suffering, so that you want to give it up. I mean, it's pretty clear, you know, but we then think, well, that sounds kind of selfish, doesn't it? To be revolted by my own suffering and to want to give it up. That we kind of get nervous and think it's selfish. So we never really delve deeply enough into renunciation and really what it means. We kind of think, oh, I've got to have compassion for others, you know. Yes, you do. But honey, child, you're not ready yet. That's the next scope. You can't possibly have compassion for the suffering of others, which is the same suffering as yours, until you know yours. And you have to be wanted to be revolted by that suffering. You have to be fed up with the suffering. That's what energizes you to want to give up suffering and its causes. That energizes you to practice. We miss this in our culture, I swear. When you hear that the main basis for purification, for example, the very first level of purification, understanding karma, you have to deeply regret the things you've done in the past, because you don't want the future suffering. Compassion comes, that's the second step. You've got to be absolutely horrified at the thought of future suffering. We don't like thinking this way. When it comes to, yes, cancer and overweight and obesity and sickness, that we get. But this seems heavy to us, you know. We've got to understand the basis of it, the reasoning. So maybe certain cultures present things in certain ways. And of course, this is coming from Tibetan culture. 1,200 years they've been presenting it this way. And that comes from Indian culture, and it's been presented another 2,000 years before that. So it's kind of the presentation is very foreign to us because it's coming from other cultures. So once we understand it, though, we can then learn to frame it in the ways that we understand, to give us the energy to want to move forward on our path, you know. I mean, one very reasonable approach to wanting to give up cigarettes is to look at the advantages of being healthy. One approach is to see the disadvantages of having cancer. But the other one, if you can't handle that, think of how marvelous it would be to have healthy lungs and have a healthy life, or to not be obese and not be sick. To think of the advantages of being happy. That's good. Let's look at that, you know. That really should energize us. In fact, I like to point that out often. It's not explicit in the teachings, you know, it's not so explicit. When we hear, you know, I talk about how, for example, what the Buddha's trying to get us to see in these first 2 scopes of practice. The emphasis, the explicit teaching is on suffering. The first level of practice about karma, it's all about, there are detail in the teachings, there are detailed teachings of all the suffering of the different lower realms. I mean, Lama Zopa's famous for when he started teaching the hippies in the 1970s, and they have their first, they call them the November course. It's always known as the November course. It's this 1 month intensive Lamrim course that happens every November and has since, you know, 1971. I think last year, last 2 years, I haven't had them. First time. The last one was one when, in fact, I was one of the Western teachers asked to do it, and that was 2019. That was the last one we did. It's the first time it's not been happening since 1971. So when they started teaching, very traditionally, of course, there's all these hippies. And one of the courses is famous for Rinpoche spending 3 of the 4 weeks giving the detailed description of the different kind of hells. I mean, it was like reading Dante's book, you know, detailed descriptions of exactly this level of hell and this second one and the third cold hell and the 5th hot hell and the this hell and the all something hell and the Vajra hell. It was like a nightmare science fiction for these poor hippies. They were in uproar. It just seems so bizarre to us. Even now, Rinpoche just cracks a joke when he says the word hell now. So this is not what we're used to, you know. And then when we are used to it, look at all the fundamentalist Christian churches. We feel this is exactly what we're trying to escape from. These hellfire and brimstone teachings. Well, Tibetans are the best hellfire and brimstone teachings you can ever find. I promise you. But it works for their minds. But for us, we go crazy, you know, we can't cope. So we've really got to find a different way to present everything, you know. This is just natural, it's evident, it's obvious. We're all coming from different psychological models with different backgrounds, different approaches, things that work for us. So when you realize that what's happening in this Lam Rim is this, you know, starting from Atisha, this Indian scholar, yogi saint back in the 11th century or something, he came in, you know, Indian scholar from Nalanda, and he came to Tibet and he'd seen that they were been practicing for a couple of 100 years. So he kind of like, there's, you know, Tantra was flourishing, the Bodhisattva teachings were flourishing, but I think he thought they'd lost the plot a bit or something. So he wrote this little book called Light, the Lamp That Guides You on Your Way. And what he did was he took the essence from all this vast body of knowledge in this amazing Nalanda system. You know, His Holiness always says we are the Nalanda tradition. There's this amazing monastic university. I've got this fly in here. There are very few insects here. It's so dry in Santa Fe. You never hardly meet an insect, I promise you. Or oh no, it depends on certain houses you do, but not in my house. I don't meet any sentient beings. And there's this fly, big fat black fly. He's been here for a couple of days. And he flies around, he makes no sound. And he goes to sleep sometimes on my chair. He's wandering around. I mean, I don't know, I hope there's enough food for him. He just wanders and wanders. I thought let him live there until he passes away, maybe, whatever. He lands on the altar sometimes. Doesn't make any noise, just floats around. Anyway, what was I saying? Yeah, okay.
Nalanda tradition.
Tradition. Okay. So Atisha came from this amazing system where they studied 20, 10, 20, 30 years, all the knowledge, the vast body of knowledge, tracking right back to the Buddha. In the Hinayana level, all the different levels of Buddhism, the Hinayana, the Vajrayana, the Mahayana, all of it, all their vast, amazing, astonishing place, you know. And that went fully developed in the minds of people like Padmasambhava, straight to Tibet in the 7th century. We are the Nalanda tradition, His Holiness said. And it's been kept intact in the minds of knowledge holders, in the minds of the yogis since then. This rich, incredible body of knowledge. So what Atisha did, he took the essence from all this body of knowledge and presented the essence of these teachings in this packaging that's called the Lam Rim, this gradual path, and presented them all the essence of these teachings in a very specific way from the point of view of experience, not just intellectual knowledge, you know, but in the way he presented it is a way of, by contemplating it, you get a taste for it. But the other approach that he used, which is evident, which is necessary, according to the level of the capacity of the disciple. That's what gradual means. And it's just exactly like we learn any body of knowledge. It's exactly like that. So the essence of the wisdom wing, which is junior school and high school, which is the first scope and the second scope, which is the Hinayana teachings, all these terms, the goal of that, the goal, if you just like I said, graduate at high school. The goal is to achieve your liberation from your suffering and its causes. So given in the Four Noble Truths, that Lord Buddha points out very clearly in the second Noble Truth, that there are two main causes of your suffering. Very straightforward, two main ones. One is the past action, karma, that you did with your body, speech, or mind, or specifically, first of all, specifically with your body and speech, to harm another based upon the delusion that drove it. So karma and delusions is how they say. Karma means your past action of harming another with your body and speech, driven by the second cause, but in fact the main cause, the two subsumed to this one, the delusion in your mind. These are the two main causes of all suffering, of all sentient beings in all the realms of existence since beginningless time. That is Buddha's observation and therefore analysis. So the practices of junior school and high school are to take you in order to stop first the grosser level of suffering, which is the lower realms, or within even a good rebirth, the bad things happening. We don't want those. So all the practice of abiding by the laws of karma, which is the essence of junior school, that's to prevent that kind of suffering. So precisely in the first level of practice, in the first scope, you are the beneficiary of those practices. You are the beneficiary of the karma of you not killing, not stealing, not lying. So of course, when we hear those words, they are actions that harm others. So when we think, well, I shouldn't kill, the first thing we think is, well, because it harms others. You're absolutely right. That's what defines that kind of action as negative, is that it does harm another. But the point, and this is what we miss, the point for why Buddha exhorts us not to kill at this first level is because honey child, petal, baby, Rabina, sweetie pie, you killing will cause you future suffering. One, being born in the lower realms. Two, having the tendency to keep kill. Three, getting killed. And four, getting sick. They're the karmic results of killing. So Buddha says, you don't want that kind of suffering, sweetie pie? Then don't kill. You are the beneficiary of it. Of course, eventually, compassion is the main reason, eventually, when you're more advanced. But you have got to realize that you don't want suffering. That's the first one. The second one we're in now, much more subtle, much more nuanced. If we take the three kinds of suffering, that one, which is the one I always talk about. The suffering of change. We talked about this on the first day, I think, or the second day. And this is driven by attachment, which is much more subtle, much harder to see. So the suffering of change is what actually we call happiness. Because indeed, like we discussed, when you meet the object of your attachment, the chocolate cake or Fred, it does in fact, and this is the point now, it does in fact trigger pleasant feelings. You know, when you get harmed, it triggers unpleasant feelings. We don't want those, so stop causing those. But we think, well, why should I try and stop causing pleasant feelings? I don't understand that. It's more nuanced. It's much more subtle. We've got to understand the logic of it. So the simple logic Buddha uses for why this is another level of suffering, which in fact we call happiness, is because it does indeed, it does trigger eating the cake, getting the object of the senses driven by attachment, does trigger happy feelings. But Buddha says, Rabina, petal, baby, honey child, have you noticed the pleasure doesn't last? So we hear that, we get annoyed. Yeah, all right, mate, I know that. What option do I have? And if you analyze your life, we know we have no option. We know there's no experience of happiness that has ever lasted. We don't like to think about it. But if we look reasonably at our lives, we will know there is no such thing. But because we can't see an option, it seems rather cruel of Buddha to tell us we've got to even give up, supposedly give up that as well. It's like, no wonder we get depressed. But we're not hearing the point. And it's not explicit in the teachings immediately, but I'll make it explicit. It helps us. All Buddha is saying is every living being wants happiness. Every living being doesn't want suffering. This is something you can see by your own observation that drives every being in the universe. And all Buddha is saying is, hey guys, I found a method of how to get happy, how to have happy feelings that don't change into suffering feelings. That's all he is saying. Speaking technically. He says, I've got a better method to get happy. But they don't say it like that. They call it giving up suffering. They don't call it getting happy. We might be more optimistic if we heard it like that. I've got a method to help you get happy, Rabina. You can't imagine how happy you can be. He doesn't say that. The emphasis is how to give up suffering. The implication, the implicit teaching is you'll get happy. But it's good for our minds to think of it that way. Instead of, oh, I've got to stop suffering. I've got to stop suffering. I've got to stop suffering. What's the bloody option? Is to be happy. So it's good for our minds to think it like that. It encourages us. So all he's saying is this. He says, you people being in samsara, and where he was once, and now we've given it up, totally believe that happy feelings, happiness, are what you get when you get what attachment wants. You do, he's telling you, but they won't last. So he's saying, I have found a method of how to get happiness that does last and that doesn't turn into suffering feelings. So he says, you think happiness comes, happiness is what you get when you get what attachment wants. No, no, no. Happiness is what you get, what you end up with when you give up attachment. That's all he's saying. That's all he's saying. So it should be encouraging to us because we know we want happiness. So he's saying, I found a method. Instead of all the time only the suffering, we need to look at the suffering one. That's the way the teachings are framed. But it's good to extrapolate, use our own intelligence. Because what the hell is the opposite of suffering? If you're giving up suffering and its causes, what do you think you're going to end up with? Not nothing. You're going to give up, you're going to end up with happiness. You should be encouraged. But it sounds to us like nihilistic. You're giving up this and giving up that and giving up that, like as if you end up with nothing. And that can be the interpretation, which is really bad. It's not that. Every time you give up killing and stealing, you start to grow happiness for you. Every time you give up anger, you start to grow happiness for you. Every time you start to lessen attachment, you grow happiness for you. For you! You've got to know how the hell to get happy and stop suffering before you help others. So stop leaping to the compassion one all the time because you're not ready for it. We've got to be disgusted by our own suffering, and we've got to be joyful about our own happiness and want them really badly. Want happiness and stop and wanting to give up suffering. You've got to be energized by that. Don't get nervous, you know. Are we communicating? Any questions before I get into Venerable Fedor's course notes? No? Ask me some questions, please. Anything from last week, maybe? Anything you like? Come on, talk to me, talk to me, talk to me.
Yes, Venerable Robina. So,
Who's that?
it's Cyril.
Hello, Cyril. Yes, Cyril. Talk to me, darling.
So just to basically clarify, I think what you just said, which I think is very, Powerful. So basically, we believe that happiness comes from attachment, getting what it wants.
Yeah,
But in
exactly.
fact, happiness comes from giving up attachment, but
Exactly.
not necessarily giving up the object of attachments.
Precisely. That's exactly right.
And a lot of people say, oh, Buddhism is so depressing and all that because it means that I need to give up all the object of attachment. But in fact, it's giving up attachments to
That's
the
right.
object of attachment, but not
That's right.
necessarily giving up the object of
But
attachment.
also, but that's true, Cyril. When you're a bodhisattva, you can afford to talk like that. You're absolutely technically correct, which is encouraging for us. But at the level we're at now, it's basically we're all alcoholics, we're all junkies. So it is intelligent to at least initially remove ourselves, as we would say, from all the triggers, which are the objects of attachment and the objects of anger. And indeed, as we do progress, and you really get genuine renunciation, you couldn't care less about cakes and food and sex and drugs and rock and roll. It doesn't, because you're already fulfilled and joyful. That's the really important point to remember. But it's true, yes, we get fundamentalists and think and that's because we conflate the object with the attachment. And that's a really crucial point to understand. Of course, you're absolutely right, Cyril. But when we remember the power of the objects and how they lead us from pillar to post, then we realize we need to be cautious. That's the whole point about practice. You understand my point?
Yes.
Right. Your point is correct. Yes. Okay. They're very good. Thank you, Cyril. Any points, anybody?
Lorraine?
Yes, sweetheart. Talk to me.
Thank you, Venerable.
Good.
So from last week, I'm working through what you said about delusion, and I've discovered an attachment to the delusions I have because I was raised in a kind of a mystical, with looking for signs and wonders. And I didn't realize how attached to that I was until I started examining my mind.
I think that's a really interesting point, Lorraine. Yeah, go on. Yes.
Yes.
That's what you want to say. Yeah, go on.
Yes. So I'm looking through my mind and all these different delusions that I have and my attachments to them based on what was comforting for me as I was growing up, and how when I tried to change my religion, thought I was changing, I kept the same pattern, and the signs and wonders just changed. And it startled me how much I still catch myself looking for a sign and not moving on anything until I have some kind of sign. But and then when I started telling myself, okay, that's delusional, I need to back away from that and not delve so much in these dreams and signs and wonders and things. But then I had, somebody, when somebody, my kids, for example, they grew up with me telling them, I have a bad feeling about this, don't do that and everything. And then they tell me, they came to rely on it because I was usually right. So I'm trying to wonder where the boundaries are between the delusion and where you're right intuitively.
No, I totally understand, darling. I really do understand. So I think this is a really good point. Thank you very much. The thing is, I think it's a very common view we have about religion. I think, and the main reason is, my sense, is that we think religion is something unable to be understood, that in its nature, it's mystical and a mystery. Now, I came up from being a Catholic and I love my Catholic upbringing. I have no problems. But I remember having a lovely discussion with some Catholic nuns. This was like years ago in Berkeley, I remember. And one of the commonest things Catholic talks about is, it's a mystery. Something's a mystery. It's a mystery. So now, if you do have confidence in a creator who did create the universe, who has a plan and doesn't have to share their plan with us, then we have faith in that person. And then necessarily, of course, things are mysterious. Of course, things are mysterious. So, and I remember saying to the nuns, don't you want to understand it? Oh no, we want the mysteries. It's a very powerful thing in creator-based religions. And I'm not being critical now. It seems appropriate. And so, but the main thing is, I think we assume something can't be explained, something can't be understood. And even more crucially, Lorraine, we don't think there are stages to be able to accomplish it. You either have a spiritual experience or you don't. And that's a bit like, this is what the analogy for me is like this. It's like we have no system for playing music, but you've got some people who, maybe learned it once and they've forgotten, but they can play music. They go to the piano and they're incredible. They play amazing music. And we assume, wow, they've got all these mystical experiences. They can play music because we assume there's no method. So they're just like, they're born like saints, you know, that's just superstition. Or the other one is you don't think there's a system for playing piano, but you got some musical tendencies, and you go to the piano and you put your fingers on it and you fiddle around and a very lovely sound comes out. Oh, wow, I played some lovely music today. And I'll say, please play it again. Oh, no, I can't do that, because we think it's an experience, and you can't replicate experiences. So I think there's a lot of superstition around all that. The Buddhist approach is, the Buddhist approach is this: if there is something from here to enlightenment that you can't explain, that you can't have a method for, then it doesn't exist. So it's quite shocking to hear it like that. Do you see my point so far, Lorraine?
Yes, thank you. Very
Now,
helpful.
the other thing is, though, darling, there's nothing wrong with signs. I mean, there's a lot of encouragement, especially in the Vajrayana teachings, the more advanced teachings, where you do look at your dreams, you do check your dreams, you do see signs, but you don't rely only on those, you know? That would be that's superstition. You plot most of the time, like that music example, 99% of the time for a musician, it's just hard grind. And then the result will be a brilliant piece of music. It doesn't come from nothing. Well, the Buddhist view, especially if you take the view of reincarnation, you bring with you whatever you've done in the past. Now, some people come into this life fully developed because they've done it all before. It's not mystical. They've done the work. And we come into whatever level we are. So we've got to keep just doing the work, one step at a time, following the teachings, following the methodology, and then you will get results, and eventually you'll perfect it, and you will get rid of suffering, and you will have achieved your liberation, and eventually you will become a Buddha. It's a logical, progressive, one step at a time. So nothing wrong with signs, but just to rely only on those. I never forget one guy I met at a place. It was very sad. He said he'd been meditating for 25 years, and he's been waiting for an experience for those 25 years. He was so distressed, you can't imagine. He's just like a greedy little vampire waiting for an experience, like some mystical thing that comes out of nowhere. It's sort of like you bash your hands on the piano for 25 years, hoping a nice sound will come out, when you've got methods that will guarantee you will get good sounds when you practice it properly. Makes sense, right?
Perfectly. Thank you.
Good, Lorraine. So keep moving, sweetheart. And that's why we need good systems. We need good teachers, reliable teachings, reliable teachers. We need to check carefully, not just leap in, because there's a lot of stuff around. We know that. Just really be cautious, really be careful, and go one step at a time, Lorraine. That's the way. Very good point. Thank you so much. What else, darling people?
Jad?
Hi, Venerable. Thank you for today.
Okay, good.
I think having examined what you're saying and I'm starting to see my attachments, and I'm starting to see my delusion. I'm seeing how many of them there is and how they're everywhere. I think I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. It feels like it's going to be a lot of work. So could you offer some advice to kind of motivate myself?
Yeah, absolutely. That's why, in a sense, I've been talking before, just now, the emphasis, the explicit teachings of these stages of practice are all about the suffering and trying to stop it and being cautious and protect yourself. So it is exhausting, but this is why it's so important to think of your potential and know, so in other words, if you, again, always examples, if you want to grow a garden into the most beautiful garden on the planet, and you go outside and you start digging up the dirt, it looks terrible. You get exhausted 8 hours a day digging up the dirt and pulling out all the weeds. If you forget what you're doing it for and just start getting really depressed about all the weeds you keep finding, and if you don't keep remembering why you're doing this, and remember the beautiful garden, remember all your potential, remember the goodness and the clarity and the wisdom and the joy, and in the teachings there are detailed descriptions of the qualities we'll cultivate as we progress, then that gives you courage to keep going. Otherwise you'll just get depressed. It's absolutely right.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. That's why it's very inspiring in all the more advanced kind of teachings in the Vajrayana, especially. You read, when you read the biographies or the yogis, and you got to give me an hour, Val. Sorry, darling. Sorry, excuse me, people. Forgive me. I have to do this. This is really naughty of me, but Please forgive me. Okay. So, yeah, anyway, I'm sorry, I got distracted. So forgive me what I just said. Whatever I said.
The
Oh, yeah, the
yogis.
reality thing. It's so inspiring. And this is what Lama Yeshe, from day one, this whole approach, he took such a different approach to dealing with Westerners when he first met us in the 70s. You know, he talked the positive, the optimistic, our potential, this is what's so crucial. If you go the typical way the Tibetans go and the way the Lam Rim is presented, you will get very depressed. When you're more stable and confident about your own qualities and your own potential, you're happy to delve into the rubbish. You are happy then, but it's in the beginning, it's quite overwhelming for us. It's exactly right what he's saying, you know. So this is why reading someone like Lama Yeshe can be very inspiring, very encouraging. When you read in detail the incredible potential of the human mind. I mean, they're quite precise, not just talking in vague, hippy-trippy terms, but in precise legal, I mean, in logical terms. I mean, the whole teachings, for example, on Buddha nature, that what that means is every mind just naturally possesses the potential to be full of goodness, wisdom, clarity, and to be utterly rid of all the nonsense and the delusions. I mean, that is an unknown concept in our modern psychological views. So to hear this and to try and hear the logic of it is extremely encouraging. Like it's visualizing the end result of your beautiful garden. That's why you're doing the weeding. Otherwise, it's get very depressing. It's absolutely right. So yes, Resham, you talk, and then Ariella, and then somebody in Zurich. Yeah, at the center. Go, talk to me, sweetheart, Resham.
Hello, Venerable. So I think you kind of answered my question, but I'm still going to ask it. We were talking about enthusiasm last week. We were talking about, being disgusted with this whole thing about suffering and not wanting it. I think I am disgusted and I don't want it, but I find my enthusiasm wavering. I find myself being extremely lazy to practice.
Of course, everyone's the same. It's very common, Resham. It really is common, and I think there's no shortcut. You just got to know. The crucial one is to not forget why you're doing it. That garden analogy. If you walk out one day and you feel so exhausted at the look of all these damn weeds again, how can I persevere with all these weeds? But when you remember the end result of the magnificent garden, you get inspiration. If you forget the reason you're doing it, you will definitely give up. So you got to have find a way to encourage yourself to think about the result for yourself. I mean, you have to find a method that works for you. What would it be like if I were less up and down like a yo-yo, less depressed, less jealous, less anxious, less worried, less angry? Would I like that?
Yes.
So you have to find a method to encourage yourself, because it's not, if it's only just digging out weeds for eternity, don't bother. But it's not easy, darling, because we are all bone lazy. We would rather just put it off and do it later, or then, of course, we never do it, So we're all the same. We're all the same, I promise you, Resham. And go one step at a time, And also, the other crucial thing is you've got to pat yourself on your back. You've got to rejoice. Even the 5 minutes of weeding, you delight. I did a good job today. You got to not just all the time point out the rubbish. You've got to point out your good qualities. You've got to rejoice in your efforts. We've got to be our own friend in that way. I can't stress that enough.
Okay.
Do you understand, darling?
Okay. One more question.
Yes, darling.
Is there any book of Lama Yeshe that you would recommend?
No, I mean, first of all, there's thousands of his teachings on lamayeshe.com have not been published, but there's lots and lots in transcript form. They're marvelous. I mean, it depends some very specific books, like, for example, Mahamudra, which came out a couple of years ago, which is a very specific meditation practice that is marvelous and very encouraging and quite interesting. And another book called Introduction to Tantra, that's really extremely helpful, because Lama started, they're the more esoteric teachings, but Lama felt the psychological approach was something that we modern people could really understand. So they're very encouraging teachings. Okay. Introduction to Tantra is one, and then Mahamudra is another. Two examples. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, sweetheart. Thank you. Hello, Ariella. Talk to me.
Thank you, Venerable Robina. I wanted to say something about the word happiness. In one of Annie Losang's teachings, she said—
Who's teaching, darling? Who's teaching? Who is the person you're quoting?
Annie Losang. Lars, maybe you can help me to make the connection for Venerable Robina, if she knows her.
Oh, I see. Okay.
I met her through Dharma Friends of Israel.
Oh, I know. Okay, very
actually
good. Yes, wonderful.
Swiss. She's actually Swiss.
Okay, I know exactly. Yes, yes. That's right.
Okay.
Go on.
Good.
Go on.
Anyway, in one of her teachings, she said that happiness is first of all, it's a feeling. So you can't always be in the same feeling. And it's a very up there word. Maybe setting our goal to be content with ourselves, with our lives, with where we are, it paves the path.
I understand. So what I think I think this is good. So let's talk about this and see what it means. Because when we say happiness, we have such a different understanding of what it is, what it means, and how you get it, that we almost think it's something else. So I think it's, again, let's look at that word and what Buddhism means by it. It's a really good point, Loza. Ariella, yeah. So next one, who wants to ask something at the center there? Someone's with their hand is up. Who's asking a question?
Can you hear me?
I can certainly hear you, but I want to see your handsome face as well. Come on up close. I want to see you, darling. Come up close to the camera. I want to see you. Who are you? Who is it?
Hi, I'm Steve.
Hello, Steve.
Hi, Robina. My question is, how can we work on giving up attachment in our everyday life? Is it about noticing the objects of attachment and staying away when it's too much or something like that? Or how can
I understand that exactly. I understand exactly. So I'm going to answer that first, then I'll look at this business of happiness, the word, the meaning of the word. So because attachment is so pervasive, we have to really remember that. And the way the teachings are presented, like in the second scope, which is where we are technically now, they're very simple about it. They're talking about attachment at a very gross level. So try and think of it. There is layers and layers and layers and layers of attachment. And every time you peel away the grosser layer, you get to ever more subtle levels, subtler, subtler, subtler. Do you understand that point first? Do you understand, Steve? Mm-hmm. That's the first point. Yeah. So the grossest level.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. So then the very first level of practice in junior school is at least don't have if your attachment to cake is so intense, then leave the cake on the plate. That's the first approach. Really cautious. If you'd really want to jump on 14 boys or girls every day, whatever example, what I'm meaning is the very first level of practice, you try to discipline your body and speech. You just try to you discipline. Now, the next level, here where we are now, because you've harnessed your body and speech, let's assume to some degree, the servants of your attachment, in other words, now you can start to delve into your mind and start to see the attachment itself. And that means, of course, studying what it means, seeing how it functions, seeing how it causes you to feel, seeing how it exaggerates the deliciousness of the cake, how it exaggerates the deliciousness of the boyfriend or the girlfriend. And so then you see the more internal work here is hearing the story that attachment is telling you that makes the cake look so divine, than the energy that drives you to stick the cake in your mouth. So it's more seeing, and so here you're still dealing with harnessing the energy now of attachment, but at the grosser level, to mean for the objects of the senses. This is the fairly gross level. If we can control that, we're in pretty good nick. We can be fairly we'd be pretty good. So this first level of practice is at least control the servants of attachment, control your body and speech. And now at the next level where we are here, you control the attachment to at least the sense objects. Do you get my point? But as you progress more and more and more, you see attachment at a much more subtle level. So attachment, for example, when you look at it more subtly, it's completely default assumption. It's an assumption that I must get only the nice things. It's much deeper. It's got the assumption attachment is like is always expecting something nice. Attachment brings possessiveness. Attachment is emotional hunger. Attachment, it's multitudes of levels, and all we can do is first knowing what it is, and then gradually controlling first the body and speech, then beginning to control the attachment for the sense objects, and then ever more subtle, ever more subtle. So in other words, the deepest attachment also is for praise, for people to love us, to be approved of. This is primordial. This is the deepest one. We don't even notice this one. We should take care at least of the grosser level first. And all we can do is do what we can according to our level. But this is why it's so crucial to understand what attachment is. If you can't give a definition, if you can't understand what it is, what kind of state of mind, how can you identify it? This is why it's important for us all to study the mind, to study the Buddhist model of the mind. What is attachment? What is a delusion? How does it function? How does it differ from a virtue? Because it's the exact opposite. So it's a very precise approach. The more details, just like learning music, like not instead of that other point that Lorraine is talking about having, it's just not some mystical thing. It's grounded in details, and then you put meat on the bones from your own experience, one step at a time. You keep getting better. And so, of course, it's to recognize it as it arises in your mind, more and more and more, ever more subtle, ever more subtle. Does that make sense, Steve?
Yeah, yeah. Thank you very much.
Good. You sure that's enough? That makes sense to you? Or is it not
That's
answering?
really, yeah. Is there something we can read about?
Well, yeah,
the method, something in reference that...
There's different approaches here. I'm just kind of raving on about it, trying to describe it, but I'm not giving many technical teachings here. I'm just describing it kind of in a sort of in a kind of experiential way. But in the end, if you really want to study it seriously, you need to study those texts. Study the text, study the model of the mind. It's quite sophisticated. It's quite technical, but it's very fascinating. So it's up to you. But I think reading Lama Yeshe is always inspiring. He talks, he's my teacher. Reading the way Lama talks, you get a taste for it and a feeling for it.
Yeah.
And the other big thing to really see that gives us a great insight in daily life, that when we see the intimate relationship between attachment and aversion or anger, attachment is all the time driving us to get the nice experiences, the nice taste, the nice feeling, the nice person, the nice sound, the nice smell. Always attachment wants that. And the stronger that neediness to get everything to be lovely is, the more upset we will get when we don't get it. So that upset is a mild version of anger. Volatile anger is the grosser level of when attachment doesn't get what it wants. And the milder level is irritated, upset, annoyed, frustrated. We all have those experiences, but we don't pay attention to them. They're thwarted attachment. When you don't get what you want a nice sound and suddenly hear a blasting car horn, you get annoyed. That's called aversion, because your attachment didn't get a nice sound. So it's quite at that level, it's quite subtle. You get my point here?
Yeah.
So we can understand how aversion is the response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. It gives a bigger dimension to understanding both of them in their relationship, And then, in other words, when you see your anger or your aversion or your irritation, that shows you your attachment. You with me?
Yeah.
So read Lama Yeshe is wonderful, but I mean, there's lots of different teachings on this. You just got to find the teachers you like that talk about it. But you see, the two main kinds of teachings, there are the experiential kind where you just talk about things, try and get a taste of it. Then the technical teachings where you learn the nuts and bolts.
Okay. Yeah.
Read Lama Yeshe, he's really inspiring. Read His Holiness. I mean, he's wonderful. But also, if you're interested, if you've got that kind of mind, study the text in more detail. I mean, the center is going to have more teachings, or look around where you can find other teachings. You study all this stuff, and that gives you the basis.
Yeah.
Do you understand, Steve?
Okay. Yeah.
Good. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, good. So listen then. Okay, now, Ariella, your point is such a good one. When, like we talked like 2 weeks ago, I think, there are three categories of states of mind in the model of the mind in Buddhism. There's either the neurotic, deluded, miserable, delusional, disturbing, ridiculous, unhappy states of mind, negative states of mind, anger, depression, jealousy, all these. Then you've got the positive ones, love, compassion, kindness, generosity. We know these. Then the third category, which are neither good nor bad, neither negative nor positive, but they are very crucial states of mind, like concentration, good memory. Whether you're a good person or a bad person, you need these to function properly. Whether you're a murderer or a meditator, you need good concentration. So these belong in that category, the third category. I call them the mechanics of the mind. Now, this other one called feeling, as you rightly said, that Lozang said, but we've got to understand what that means, because it's not what we think. When we say feeling, we equate it with another word called emotion. So we'll say, love is a feeling, we'd say. That's not the way Buddhism describes. Feeling is a really bare bones thing. We either have a pleasant feeling, an unpleasant feeling, or a neutral feeling. So let's forget the neutral. Okay, Ariella, we got the pleasant feelings and the unpleasant. So another word for pleasant feelings. So no, first of all, there's a question of degree, you know. So many synonyms for pleasant feeling. I'll now tell you the words: pleasure, joy, bliss, ecstasy, rapture, happiness. They're all synonyms, but they all indicate levels of happy feelings, don't they? You with me here? Now, there's another word called being content. Contentment is happy feelings. So we don't, when we say happy, we sort of think of it as hyperventilating. No, it means the mind is pleased, the mind is relaxed, comfortable, the mind is spacious, the mind is open. That's what a pleasant feeling is. So then we know we've got unpleasant feelings. Well, another word for those is agony, torture, suffering. They are unpleasant feelings, and we know there's a whole spectrum of them. You with me now? So, yes. So this is the point that Buddha's saying. Every moment of what we call a happy feeling, whether it's simply slight feeling of contentment all the way to a feeling of rapture. I mean, I'm waiting for those to come. I've never had one of them. It's a question of degree. You get my point. They are the fruit of a past virtuous action that you did that dropped a positive karmic seed in your bank vault that now is ripening as that pleasant feeling. Every millisecond of you count the moments of pleasant feelings, each is the fruit of a past virtue. Equally, every unpleasant feeling is the fruit of a non-virtuous action. This is the technical explanation that Buddha gives us about the main cause of happy feelings and unhappy feelings. So then we think, well, what's the role of the cake and the boyfriend and the person punching me? They're the external events, aren't they? So we assume the punch is the main cause of the unpleasant feeling, and we assume the delicious cake is the main cause of the pleasant feeling, don't we? You with me? But they're not. They're merely catalysts that trigger the karmic seed you'd already planted in order to have an unpleasant feeling. And I'll give a good example. I used to do Kung Fu and martial arts. I would get punched regularly. I'd broke my muscle. I tore a muscle. I got kicked. But I didn't have very unpleasant feeling. I learned because we were taught to learn from it. And even when we were doing sparring, my teacher, Mr. Lee, would say, if you and I are sparring and you kick me, I apologize to you because I didn't get out of the way. So and I didn't go home with angry and upset and having unhappy feelings. My pain hurt. That was an unhappy feeling, but I was happy about it because I was doing Kung Fu. So it is an unhappy feeling if your body hurts. That's an unhappy feeling. It's an unhappy feeling if a person criticizes you. An unhappy feeling comes. But the unhappy feelings are the fruit of past negative actions, and the catalyst that triggers it is the external event. This is the crucial point, which is another point from what you were talking about. But contentment, yes, is another word for happy feelings. But we assume happiness is like hysterical. No. So there are two things, and now also another two things. One is, as you practice every day, lessening your anger, lessening your attachment, lessening your jealousy, growing your kindness, growing your forgiveness, growing your generosity, all a part of your practice every day. It might be quite hard work. You don't necessarily feel happy, but you are happy about that because like doing the gardening, you might be exhausted from all that weeding, but you're happy with yourself because you know that you're sowing the seeds for a beautiful future garden. So that's another kind of happiness that mightn't just be a joyful feeling. And that is an immediate one that you will get when you know you've just achieved your goal. You tried to practice, you didn't say those mean words to your sister, and you are glad for yourself. You're happy, even though it feels like a struggle. Do you understand? So there's the immediate ones. And then as we practice lessening delusions and controlling our body and speech and growing our mind, we will become more stable, less up and down, less neurotic, more content. That's another word for happiness. Absolutely. Do you understand? Ariella. Okay. What else, people?
Cyril, has a
Yes,
question.
please. Absolutely.
Yes, Venerable Rabina. So my question is, I understand how each pleasant feeling is a result of a virtuous karmic seed ripening that was planted in the past.
That's right.
And every unpleasant feeling is a result of a non-virtuous karmic seed ripening and having been planted in the past. And the trigger, the catalyst, is only a secondary condition. My question is, in the Buddhist school of thought, is that trigger, is that catalyst a random event?
Not possible. No.
So
Can't be
what?
that.
So it's not. So
It can't be.
what? How does it come into existence?
Let's use a simple example, Cyril. You know, there's 4 ways that karma ripens. First is your type of rebirth. So there's Cyril with the human body. That's the fruit of non-killing. Within Cyril's body, there is a mind, and Cyril's got certain tendencies. So that's the second way your karma ripens, is the habit to think the way you think, right? Do you understand? So third one is the experiences similar to the cause. So then let's say you are being generous. You're trying to be generous, you know, you're trying to pay your bills, and you know, that's a tendency you've got, and you'll keep in, and the fruit of that is you'll keep increasing that tendency. You'll grow that habit, which is marvelous. But let's say you've got no generosity karma. No, sorry. Yeah, even that. Let's say you pay your bills, but people steal from you, and people don't pay their, no matter how hard you try, you always get a bad response. So that's, you know, you're being generous is one thing, but the okay, no, that's not quite right one. The trigger, you want the trigger. So let's just say, okay, no, sorry, start again. Let's say the chocolate cake, simple example. So you have attachment, you get the chocolate cake, forget the attachment. So there's an event out there, and it's called a chocolate cake, and you eat the chocolate cake, and then it triggers a pleasant feeling in your mind, right? But what if you're sick? It will trigger, you'll vomit, won't you? So the cake is merely the catalyst, which in this case, 1 will trigger an unpleasant feeling because you'll eat it and it'll be revolting and you'll get sick. Or 2, it'll trigger a pleasant feeling. The cake is not a random event. The fact that you met a cake is because you've got generosity karma. So if you might have bucket loads of tendencies to have happy feelings, but you never meet the conditions, you only all the time meet unhappy conditions that cause you to get sick, that cause you to be harmed all the time. So the events, so they're all called, the events out there are called experiences similar to the cause. You can't meet a cake, even a cake, if you haven't got generosity karma. That's the fruit of receiving something. But if the cake all the time causes you to be sick, that's because of past killing karma, that even the cake, you might be the richest man on the planet and have 40 million cakes every day, but they only ever cause you to get sick because you've got lots of killing karma. And the cake is the catalyst that triggers the suffering as a result of your past killing. You with me?
So if I've killed in the past and I get run over by a car, the car running over me is not a random event.
No, of course, my God, no. It's called the experiences similar to the cause, in this case, of past killing. And it's personal. That driver didn't run you over randomly. You got karma with that person. And that triggers, that for you triggers the ripening. It's the ripening of your past negative karma of killing. But it also triggers a very unpleasant feeling when your leg breaks. And it can never be random, not possible.
That I know, but the car is not random. The car is different. The car is also part of karma.
What do you mean? What do you mean by that?
The car hitting me on that particular day, but
the real one, I mean, the car is the instrument and the person is drive. I mean, you know, if you've got a karma of a tree falling on top of you, the tree doesn't do it on purpose. There's no particular person involved, but there's some action you must have done in the past. I mean, I don't know exactly how all that works. There's no person there doing it to you, but it can't be a random event. It can't be, you know, like random, like we think it is, just bad luck, you know, we think it's like that. It can't possibly be. If karma is logical, which is said to be a logical law, there can't be a random event. It's not possible.
So how would that work? That my karma affects this tree falling on me? That's what I'm having really hard time understanding.
But the 4 elements, one way our karma ripens, Cyril, is called environmental karma. The physical world consisting of trees and food and air and water, the configuration, this is only really easy to understand if we understand the Vajrayana teachings. You see, okay, as Lama Zopa said, if we've got the Vajrayana teachings, you've got the gross body and the gross mind, which is a sensory. Then you've got subtle mind and subtle body. And subtle mind is your mental states running through this subtle nervous system that you've got, and it's inextricably linked to these wind energies. The wind energies is subtle physical. So then as Lama Zopa says, even just your mind being angry, just your thoughts being angry, that one produces angry tendencies, which becomes your habit. But two, it pollutes the wind energies in your own body, which eventually ripen as your physical sickness, but even in turn over a longer period will impact upon the external elements, and you'll be born in an environment where the food poisons you. So the physical world is the elements, which seem so abstract to us. This is the result. So you're in a place where there's bad weather. That's the collective karmic result of all the negative actions of all those sentient beings we're experiencing together, where the weather harms us. I mean, look at COVID. It's the world karma of past killing such that we get sick just by kissing our sister. So the physical world harms you, whether it's just kissing your sister or a tree falling on you. It's the karmic result of past negative actions. Or if the physical world helps you, you know, the food nourishes you, the water nourishes you. Some people have such good karma, they never get sick, they never get problems with the environment, even if they eat shitty food. I mean, I always quote Warren Buffett, this mega rich American fellow. He's like 90. And I remember reading his biography, and his daughter said, I never saw water pass his lips. All his life, his diet, and he's 90 now, cheeseburgers, some flavored Coca-Cola, and vanilla ice cream. That has been his diet for 85 years. And he's as fit as a fiddle. That shows the physical world nourishes him because of past non-killing karma. You with me?
Yes, thank you.
Good points. Thank you so much. Okay, people, what else? We're nearly finished with the Hardy today.
Yes, we have a question in the box.
Okay.
Sarah, would you like to ask?
This sounds basic, but can karma happen, the fruits of karma happen in this lifetime, or is it always a past?
No, it can be in this life, it seems, yes. There can be particularly heavy actions can ripen in this life. But in general, Sarah, like I think, again, always the analogy, you know, if you look outside in your garden today, you will literally see a little sprout pop up. You just see it for the first time, but you know you didn't plant the seed 5 minutes ago. But you can put it this, so that seed was planted a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a month ago, who knows? So what ripens each moment in our daily life is the fruit of past seeds planted. But you can also say what you do now, like in other words, the pruning and the watering of that garden can encourage the growth of those past weeds or flowers for that matter. So that all the seeds are there, but what we do now can have a massive impact on how quickly they ripen. But technically, mostly the actions we do now, they bring results now. They bring results now. So for example, you know, if I'm mean to you and I punch you in the nose, then you punch me right back. We say, oh, that's karma, but not technically, because what it really is happening is I punch you because I've got the tendency to punch. You get punched by me because you have the karma to be punched by me, but you've also got the karma to be punching me right back. And that doesn't, so that you punching me back is not a direct result of me punching you, but it was the ripening of my part. I'm getting confused now. It's like the catalyst again. My punch was a catalyst that triggered the ripening of my past karma to get punched. So your punch now I'll start again. Your punch now is not the direct result of my punch a moment ago. Your punching me now is the fruit of my punch 22 lives ago. And my punching you triggered the ripening of that seed. Does that make sense, Sarah?
Yes, thank you.
So then we can change radically our karma now by if we nurture, you know, if we pull the weeds out every day, and if we nurture and grow and put water on and fertilizer on all our garden, it'll encourage the ripening of good seeds that were already planted a long time ago. You with me?
Yes.
So it's sort of complex, but if we understand these 4 ways that karma ripens, it really gives us an insight into it. Yeah, thank you, Sarah. So what else is there, Sarah? Anything there? I haven't even begun to look at Fedor's notes. You're going to have to just do it yourselves. I'm just giving extra things on top of Venerable Fedor. I think I just got to keep saying, you've got to read Venerable Fedor for the nuts and bolts. And I just do a bit of raving on, okay? But are there any more questions, please?
Yes, one more did pop up. David, would you like to ask?
Yeah. Yes, David.
Go ahead.
Go, sweetheart.
Okay, thank you, Venerable. I was asking about the implications of suicide.
Yes.
Was the act of suicide a ripening of karma on one hand, and on the other, does the motivation affect the karmic implications of the act?
Yes. Exactly. So yes, David, the key, I say this a lot and I want to keep saying it, and we should explain it more and more. The key factor that determines the character of the action we do, keeping in mind that whatever we do is either a negative action, a positive action, or a neutral action. Speaking simply, okay? And there are very vast variations of those. There can only either be an action that's negative, positive, or neutral. All right, first point. So the character, what determines the main thing that determines the character of an action, that is to say whether it's negative or positive, which in turn is to say which seed is planted in our little bank vault, which in turn means the fruit that will come from it isn't so much the action itself as the thing that motivated it. So it's fairly clear. You can be walking down the street. I can be walking down the street and with you, and I want to impress you. So I see a poor person, and I'm not usually generous, but I want to impress you. So I give the guy $10 and you praise me. So then you can argue the guy's happy. He's got his $10, but look at my motivation. It's pretty stinky. There's no real virtue in that motivation. The guy got something, there's something, but my motivation was really manipulative to impress you because you're rich and I want you to give me my money, your money. So that's a simple thing. And most of our motivations are driven by attachment and neediness and anger and all the rest. So whereas on the other hand, you could say, and this is a big one for us, when you like say you've got a little pussycat, and like the people in the world, you think because the pussycat's sick, it's good to kill the pussycat. We call it putting it down. We call it euthanasia. But you know, the point is from the Buddhist one, first of all, there's 2 things. One is in the same with the $10. There's 2 things going on. One is the person who gets his $10. He's happy. So there's a result for the recipient of the action, but there's also a result for the doer of the action. And that depends for me on my motivation. Now, the same with killing, even killing. So you've got your pussycat, you love your pussycat, you have compassion for your pussycat's sick, and your vet will encourage you, which most people do these days, to put your cat down. So you feel so sad about it, and you're really sad, and you love your pussy, so you decide to kill your pussycat. Now, you could argue there, from the side of you, your motivation was not too bad. You with me here so far?
Right.
But as Dalai Lama says, or Lama Zopa says, meaning well is not enough. So in the case of a negative action, we've got to look at what happened to the pussycat. So pretty much being a pussycat, you don't know its mind. You don't have any clairvoyance. You do not know the way it died, how it died, because the point is when at the time of death, the main factor that determines the rebirth of the animal or the human is that their mind is peaceful or not peaceful. So if you want your pussycat, I mean, we don't think of the future results. So it's not more than likely that you put your pussycat from the frying pan into the fire and it got reborn in a worse rebirth than even its pussycat rebirth. But we don't think like that, of course. So there's the result for the object of the action. In a good action, the lucky guy got his $10, but I didn't create much virtuous karma. And from the pussycat side, you probably didn't create much negative karma because you really meant well, but you probably put the pussycat into a much worse rebirth. So wisdom is what is important in terms of actually knowing how to benefit somebody. But the motivation from our side is the main thing that determines whether what you do is good or bad. So killing in general is negative, but you wouldn't create much negative karma because your motivation was good. And generosity is good, but I didn't create much virtue because my motivation was lousy. Which doesn't mean you should go around killing people with a good motivation. Don't kill at all, best, until you've got some wisdom. You with me here? So killing yourself, I mean, with real respect to us tragic human beings, I would have to say it would probably be rare for us to decide with a joyful, happy, compassionate mind to decide to kill ourselves. I don't think so. Do you think? I mean, we're so suffering, so full of despair, can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, can't bear the pain. All we want to do is disappear, you know? So it can't be the best motivation. It just can't be. It's not being mean. Just look at it logically. So then to die with that unhappy kind of mind, at the time your mind leaves the body, that can only trigger a negative karmic seed, which will likely give you a much worse suffering rebirth. Just a general statement. It's not being personal. You understand? Do you understand? But you could argue another person, you can even imagine another person really having a good motivation, not wanting to have the family spend all that money, truly have a pure, it's not impossible to think you could have a pure motivation. It's not impossible to think that. Do you understand?
Yes,
but
I
even
do.
if you do have a positive, I remember the Dalai Lama was so sad. At some point, there was a whole spate of young Tibetans in Tibet burning themselves alive, you know? So, I mean, they meant really well, but until you're a great yogi, I don't think you're going to die so well. When you hear stories about these people running down the street in agony, screaming in agony while they're burning alive, you might have meant well when you did it, but I don't think your mind will be very happy when you're dying, living like that. So His Holiness would always show such sadness that they would do this, you know? Do you understand?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But on the other hand, you think about it, you remember always those photos of those two monks, I think, in Vietnam, burning themselves to death. I think it wasn't directly actually about the Vietnamese war. It was more to do with the politics at the time between the Buddhists and the administration. So it's obvious that they sat there quietly, not raging and screaming. You can only deduce that they had single-pointed concentration and they were able to go to that subtle level of mind, so they wouldn't have felt any pain. So who knows what their motivation was? They might have had really virtuous motivation, you know, to try and show something. It's hard to know. You understand?
Yes. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much. Time to go, darlings. So I really encourage you to read Venerable Fedor's notes, please. He's got masses of information in there. I'm just talking generally about this approach all the time to try to get a feeling of the different levels of approach of these different stages of practice. You know, it's my main concern. So, sweethearts, no more questions there, Tara? Oh, that's it.
No.
Okay, well, how many more of this module have we got?
One.
Okay, we'll try and do an overview next time and a summary of it all. We'll see how we go. So thank you, everybody. So kind. Happy to see you all you kind human beings, your lovely faces every time. We've become such friends, haven't we, all this year? We're nearly finished too. May, June, July, August, September. I've got to tell you in advance, I've got to decide what to do, that I'll be in Australia and New Zealand in August and September. And it'll be probably 1 in the morning for me in New Zealand. It'll be 3 in the morning for me in Australia. So I suppose I can be brave instead of making you guys change your times. I'm just letting you know, I'll be 3 o'clock in the morning. So if I'm not off to sleep, you'll know what the problem is. Okay. That'll be August and September. And suddenly 1 year will have gone like a flash of lightning. So we've made the most. Very happy. Okay, precious ones. Jangchub, Semchog, Rinpoche, Make, Panam, Kieguchi, Kiepan Yampa, Mepa Yang, Gongne, Gondu, Pavachog. That's it. Goodbye. Be happy. Good night.
Thank you.
I love everybody.